And welcome once again to another episode of the Horizon Roundtable, the first of two special episodes we have for you this week. I am Bob McDonald, and you can find me on Twitter because I can't stay away and I can't stop responding at Bob McDonald. Jimmy Lemke, who will be joining us on the second episode as opposed to this one, you can find him on Twitter at PantherU. And as always, you can follow the podcast on Twitter at HorizonRT. As I mentioned, this is the first of two special episodes because we've got two great interviews this week. The second episode, we'll just say it right out. Again, we're having Oakland's coach Greg Campy on, so you definitely don't want to miss the second episode. The first episode, this episode right now, we're going to be having a discussion, or at least I'm going to be having a discussion with Scott Garrett, who is the new athletic director at Cleveland State. He just came on the job about a month ago, and he's been kind of jumped in with both jumped in the pool with both feet. So been a busy guy. So it's good to finally get a moment to get him in and to definitely have a nice talk about where he kind of sees Cleveland State going forward. Plus, he, as I'm sure you all have seen, he has some already has some Horizon League roots, having spent quite a number of years over at UIC, and so we're definitely going to have a discussion about that as well. So, without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started. And here we go with my interview with Scott Garrett. All right, Scott, thank you very much for joining us here on the podcast, and welcome to Cleveland State.
Well, thanks, Bob. I appreciate it so much. Thanks for having me and giving us an opportunity to talk about Viking athletics.
You thank me now, but... it's like, so obviously, I wanted to talk a little bit kind of about your journey to this point. As I understand, obviously your roots are actually in the Horizon League. So kind of walk me through, because you started at UIC. So kind of walk me through that first year of yours, because as I understand it, you kind of had an interesting journey to get to. You started out as an intern, and then you kind of worked your way into a full-time role. Kind of talk to me a little bit about kind of that entire journey, because that sounds like it sounded pretty interesting to me, but I wanted to share it with everybody else.
Sure. So I went as an undergrad to Illinois State University, and grew up in the southwest suburbs of Chicago, and went to Illinois State and enjoyed 4 years there. And it was about halfway through that undergraduate experience that I thought I might want to work in college athletics and be an athletics director someday. When I graduated from Illinois State, went on to grad school at Indiana and spent just over a year there. And as I was wrapping up the sport management degree, my master's at Indiana, my fiance at the time, my wife now, Christy, and I were, set to get married that fall in 2003 and move back home. And I was looking for jobs in college athletics and, having a really hard time getting my foot in the door. Mm-hmm. So I emailed all the athletics directors at the Division I level in Chicago, Northwestern, Loyola, UIC, DePaul, and the AD at the time, Jim Schmidt, who has since retired in the last couple of years, reached back out and said, we'd love to have you interview for a marketing and ticket sales internship. And so I did. I drove up and interviewed, and they hired me that day. They said, you're going to make $800 a month, and it's a year-long internship, and we'll see where it goes. And so the agreement was, until I found something full-time, that I would do that. And about 3 months into that internship, our director of sales and ticketing left. And that was the 2003-2004 season. So, okay. For 9 months of that year, and it was UIC's last NCAA tournament appearance.
Yes, it was.
I was a one-man marketing and ticket crew and oversaw all of that operation as really almost an unpaid intern. And that experience allowed me to get hired on full-time, and I spent another 4 years there.
Yeah. That must have been a brutal commute. I've had to drive. I've had the recent pleasure of driving into over by the UIC area. That's not a great. That's not great, especially during rush hour.
Yeah, when I started, we lived about 50 miles from downtown, and that was about a 2-hour commute each way.
Wow.
And we moved a bit closer as the time went on, and once I got full-time and could afford to live in a closer place, we moved about half that distance, about 30 miles, and that was still about an hour and 15 minutes each way. And so, yeah, having a young family and trying to grind and working a lot of hours and trying to hustle tickets and
Sure.
Working basketball games and other sporting events, it made for some really long days. And it was really a test of, do you really love this, and is this what you want to do forever? And for me, it's always been, a passion to help student athletes and interact with fans and donors and, just provide value back to the university. And I definitely, that experience made me better and really tested my resolve of, is this what I want to do as a career?
Yeah, definitely. That definitely sounds like it would. Now, I'll get, because I want to talk a little bit about Jimmy Collins, because I know that's right when you were, you both your paths cross, I'm sure.
Yeah, they did. I got there in. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, well, I the one thing you mentioned doing ticketing for multiple sports, and I gotta ask, because I assume in that is obviously includes baseball, and I'm trying to remember, was that around the same time that Curtis Granderson was going there?
So Curtis's tenure as a student athlete predated me getting there. I think he graduated the year before.
Okay.
And got drafted the year before
Gotcha.
I arrived. But the great story about Curtis was that he, I think he was supposed to come there to play basketball and ended up as a baseball
Really?
player. And then obviously that took off, took him on a totally different path. And it's definitely one of the great success stories is UIC. And he's given back to UIC so
Sure.
much, and during his professional career, just a really great guy. I've been fortunate to meet him a couple times, and great people there in Chicago. And you mentioned Jimmy Collins, and I did work with Coach Collins and his staff, and was fortunate that first year to be a part of his team that had 23 wins.
Sure,
and,
that was the
Cedric Banks and Martell Bailey and Armand Williams
Yep.
and those guys. And then we went down to Kemper Arena and got killed by KU, and they sang Rock Chalk the whole second half, and that was a very interesting experience.
Yeah, I'm sure it was. I know the Jimmy Collins. Jimmy Collins, obviously, it will always be remembered in Horizon League lore. I know my co-host Jimmy Lemke is a Milwaukee grad. So, and I know that the rivalry between Bruce Pearl when he was still at Milwaukee and Jimmy Collins was rather heated. So that was
it made for some interesting moments having them back there. Obviously, their history went back a long ways into the Big Ten days, and for me, the perspective was that it sold tickets. That rivalry. We played them in the Horizon League championship game in 2003. And it was a great environment, winner take all to go to the NCAA tournament, and created for some really great games and a great environment for the student athletes to play in, despite all the distraction that created.
Yeah. So it's funny because I'm old enough to remember all that stuff.
Yeah.
So now after UIC, you made your way to Kansas State. And you started there in 2008, I believe it was.
So I actually went from UIC to Wichita State for a couple year stint for about a year and a half.
I keep forgetting the Wichita State part, and I really shouldn't.
Yeah, that's all right. So I was at Wichita State as an assistant AD from 2008 to 2010. So it was a little over a year and a half.
Sure.
And then, didn't think I would leave there that quickly, but the opportunity at K-State opened, and I got involved in applying for that and got a chance to visit with John Curry, who was the AD there at the time, and now is the AD at Wake Forest. And, really that partnership with John and working for him early in his tenure at K-State and helping him build his vision for a model intercollegiate athletics program helped my career trajectory in in a tremendous way. And I learned so much from all the people in Manhattan, and spending 9 years there was really, perfect for me at that point in my career, and really got me to a point where I was prepared to take on this role at Cleveland State.
Now with the Cleveland State role, I guess that brings me to my next question now. Now, obviously, you are since being cutting your teeth at UIC, you're familiar with Cleveland State. What was kind of the draw to this particular role? I mean, obviously we've had a little bit of turnover the last couple of years. So, kind of was it one thing that kind of stuck out with the Cleveland State job, or was it a number of different things?
Yeah, I think it was a number of different things. Certainly the familiarity with Cleveland State as a brand, and in my time at UIC, and then it being in the Midwest where I've spent my whole life. I consider Midwest. Some people might consider it farther east, but I think it's a Midwest town, and always have.
So do I.
Yeah, so that familiarity, and then the regional appeal were the initial attraction. To be honest, I had been to Cleveland once a little over 20 years ago for a baseball series. I'm a White Sox fan, and hopefully people don't hold that against me here in Cleveland. But I came here for a White Sox Indian series, and my last impression of Cleveland was totally different than what it is now. And so that initial attraction was it's just grown so much. It was a different place when I visited, and so I was initially kind of skeptical if it was something that would fit for me. But then threw my name in the hat and got into the search. And my first visit with President Sands is really what sold this. And so partnering with him and his team on improving the trajectory and building Cleveland State as a university, and how athletics can partner in that was really important for me, I thought, to be a part of. And I was just blown away with the resurgence of downtown and, Playhouse Square, and everything going down, around Rocket Mortgage Arena, and what the Cavs have done. And, certainly the opportunity here, the opportunities that existed as I learned more about the department, was that I really do feel like it's a place where I can make an impact. I can work with our staff and our coaches and our student athletes to deliver what we call a transformational student athlete experience.
Sure. Yeah, by the way, 20 years ago, I can agree with you. Most of downtown Cleveland was an episode of Life After People. So that was... it was there was a lot of Scooby-Doo ghost town things going on, but obviously that has changed, thankfully, over the past couple of decades. So that's that's pretty useful. Now that you're in the role, I mean, obviously, from my perspective, I've been following Cleveland State forever and ever and ever. You're coming at a very interesting time. And by interesting, I mean, it's not been great. I mean, the basketball team, the Crown Jewels, lost 20 games in a row, 4 years in a row. Attendance is the lowest I've ever seen it. And I've been following a lot. And you add to that the largest news organization in the area, the Plain Dealers, basically abdicated any responsibility to cover Cleveland State anymore. I've railed on about that multiple times. So with that said, I mean, how do you see kind of, taking that situation and how do you assess that on your end and kind of, strategize to, make significant improvements?
Yeah, those are all great questions. I think I've been here 3 weeks, and it's been a great listening tour is really what it's been, is hearing historical perspective on things that have gone well and things that haven't gone well. One of the things I've shared with our staff is that we're not allowed to use the word challenges. We're going to view everything as an opportunity. And that's really the mindset that we need to operate with, is that, certainly attendance is down. A men's basketball program that hasn't really won in 4 years. and had any sort of consistency. Other things that are in front of us that we'll need to tackle along the way.
Sure.
Fortunately, my wheelhouse is marketing and tickets and revenue generation. And so I've already, got ideas and been engaged with our staff for the last 3 weeks on strategies that we're going to use to improve that, regardless of the team's performance. I think there's opportunities for us to improve the game day environment and the experience and how we build a marketing plan to outreach to alumni and faculty and staff and students and, use social media and use relationship building and all those things. So, I never entered this and after the first 3 weeks, certainly now don't ever view this as something that we can't do. Definitely looking at the bright side of all the things, all the possibilities that we have to grow. Mm-hmm. And then certainly the team performance is going to have to align with that. At some point, we've got to get going in men's basketball. And, mm-hmm. There are encouraging signs there. We won 6 out of the last 10 and 4 out of the last 6 games. And, if you look through the schedule last year, there's signs of optimism. There's, a handful, there was a 3-point loss at Fort Wayne and, a 1 or 2 point loss at Green Bay, the win at Northern Kentucky in front of what was the largest crowd that we played in front of all year. Mm-hmm. All of those things I think are positive signs, and certainly, returning all of your starters and 80% of your scoring or minutes, and really, good kids, and adding a couple, impact folks that Coach Felton feels like will contribute, the trajectory should improve. And then, mm-hmm. Our efforts from a marketing standpoint will align with the team's performance and it'll get better.
Okay. Sure. One of the things last year, one of the other bright spots last year, other than being Northern Kentucky, and that's never going to get old, is the fact that for probably the first time in maybe 30 years, Cleveland State basketball has been on broadcast television. They had the 6-game broadcast deal with WUAB channel 43, mm-hmm. the CW. Nothing has made me happier than to be able to use my antenna and be able to watch the game without having to have an ESPN Plus subscription. Is that something moving forward? Is that something that's going to be on the table again next year and subsequent years? Or have you had a discussion about kind of the broadcast rights at this point?
Sure. So actually, Commissioner Lacrosse was here a couple days ago and had an opportunity to visit with him. We're going to be great league partners, and I think for the benefit of the whole Horizon League, we need to be at the forefront of the evolution of how TV has changed. And the more content that we can aggregate as a league and provide to folks like ESPN for ESPN Plus or to others for digital packages is, I think, important for the growth of our league from a revenue standpoint and from a visibility standpoint. And although all of the folks, out there watching sports have not necessarily evolved to feeling comfortable with a subscription model, it's only a matter of time before that's the best practice. And so, it's unfortunate that local access diminishes, but I think the reality of where we're at from a technology perspective is that, being able to watch on any device anywhere is really, really important. And the numbers speak to that. So if you go back and look at data of the exposure of the teams in our league and certainly Cleveland State, that the numbers bear out that that's the right decision. And so, and I'll touch on your question previously too about the plain dealer and local media. That is obviously very important.
That one's kind of a sore subject for me. I'm not gonna lie. That's kind of annoyed me for about a decade.
Sure, and you hate to see people lose their jobs and corporations downsize newspapers, but that evolution is happening too. And so we need to embrace the evolution of, from traditional media to digital media. And a lot of it is controlling our own message. And so we've talked about our staff that, we can't necessarily fight a battle that we can't win. Sure. Should we invest our times in seeing if the local newspaper will cover us, or should we invest our time in building out a great digital platform and providing video content and social media and telling our own story. We've got to expose stories of our student athletes and their experiences here at Cleveland State as students, as people, as competitors, and nobody can make a bigger impact than ourselves in that effort.
And I know that's something that's and that's something I've talked. I mean, obviously that's a pretty big deal. And that's the intention that not just basketball, but a lot of the other sports should be. I mean, we're talking about. You had the men's golf team went to won the Horizon League championship 4 years in a row, and it took them winning the championship 4 years in a row to get a TV spot on TV spot on Channel 19. I mean, that's if there is an avenue that you guys are working on, God bless you.
It's a great question, and I think local media and local TV and radio is always going to be part of our outreach strategy, and we'll maintain relationships with them, with all of those folks. I think it is, but it can't be our only strategy. We can't just sit back and complain that we're not getting covered. We have the mechanism and the tools to cover our own stories, through folks like you and others that are in the digital media space, and we're just going to have to evolve. Sure.
Yes. One other thing, speaking of that digital part, I know that the one thing that this has actually been, and I know a lot of, the fans that are still around, this has kind of come up multiple times. I know I've talked about it a couple of times, that, obviously during the season, for many, many years, it's, the basketball coach, whoever that was, be it Mike Garland or Gary Waters or now Dennis Felton, has had the weekly radio show. And one of the things that we've always wondered, because the one thing that I know fans haven't had access to is kind of those digital, the being able to kind of have access to that if they can't if they can't listen live. Is that something that you're going to be starting to work on? I know that's something that I've mentioned a lot of times. I mean, it's not all the time I'm able to listen to the weekly show, and I'd love to hear it. I'd love to hear it, during the week or something like that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's news to me that it wouldn't have been available. So I appreciate you bringing it up. We definitely would want some availability of that, and to rebroadcast it or have it available on our site.
Sure.
We did meet with the folks at Salem Communications actually yesterday.
Okay.
That currently have our radio rights, and we talked a lot about the coaches show and other ways that we can leverage that relationship to spread the message about Cleveland State. And I think that we'll find ways to do that. And that's a great recommendation, that access to that show and not having to listen to it live is certainly one of those tactics that we would use to spread the message.
Now, for obvious reasons, as somebody who has a podcast, my recommendation would just go to a full podcast, but that's a whole other thing.
Live radio rights are still important in college athletics, and particularly in basketball for us. And so, anytime you can couple other inventory, whether that's other contests with our other teams and, promotions that we can do on air with their other stations, and it also provides value to sponsors, right? We've got a number of restaurant partners and hotel partners, and the ability to bring our party to those places can help those relationships and help drive revenue for our department.
Sure. So one of the focal points of our podcast in general is obviously it's about the fan bases. And over the last year, we've talked a lot about the student fans. I know we have talked to student fans from Northern Kentucky, the Valhalla Vanguard, as well as the Oakland's Grizz Gang, and both of them have been. Those are two examples of student fan groups that kind of grew organically and kind of have come to the forefront of kind of being that face, that student face of the fan base. And Cleveland State has attempted this a couple of times. Many years ago with the Berserkers, and then transitioning into the Viking Village, and it hasn't seemed to, in the last couple of years. It hasn't really seemed to have kind of gotten any legs. And I guess my question would be kind of how do you, especially with knowing that, if you get student fans eventually translate to alumni, who translate to future season ticket holders, which it translates to future ticket revenues. So it's all kind of a big cycle. And my question would be kind of how do you kind of address what I see as kind of the disconnect between the student, the student body and what's going on, in athletics, specifically with men's basketball.
Yeah, it's definitely one of the things that we'll need to work on a strategy for. Mm-hmm. We visited a little bit. We've been pretty focused the last 3 weeks on men's basketball season tickets,
sure.
And how we generate unrestricted donations and how that interacts with season tickets. Mm-hmm. We will tackle student attendance and student engagement initiatives. Our staff has talked about what the experience is like for a student coming to a game. Mm-hmm. We'll pay attention to that. Where do they sit and how close do they sit? What type of other experiences in addition to just watching the game do we provide, or giveaways or other engagement? We've got to work to get on campus and get coach and the student athletes and our staff in front of as many people as possible. We've got to get into the residence halls and into the apartments around campus. We need to be at the restaurants and in dining centers that our students are eating at. And we've got to find ways to just generate excitement and build relationships with students, mm-hmm. a relationship with student government and a lot of our other larger student organizations, collaboration with our student affairs officials on campus. All of those things will be strategies that we use. And then you're right. I do think that some sort of identity is always important. Yeah. And you see some of the best student sections in the country have that, mm-hmm. visual brand and something that, students can feel like they're part of a club, right? Mm-hmm. They're always looking for a group to be a part of. And so can we provide that type of identity? What I've seen is most places where that occurs, it's not forced. Mm-hmm. It's something that kind of evolves naturally from the students. Sure. And so, I asked, I think on my first day here is, who are our student super fans? And it wasn't a good sign when the answer was, I'm not really sure. So we've got to identify who those super fans are.
It's funny you mentioned that. Prior to the podcast, I actually wrote a weekly column, and one of the things that I did before every school year is, openly address the incoming freshmen. And I guess I don't know. Maybe I was a little abrasive. I don't think they listened to me. I don't know how.
Well, we definitely want to be out and be positive and not talk about, how many students we don't have at games. We want to talk about the potential of how many we could have at games.
Sure.
And so we'll definitely be engaged.
I think that's a good idea.
Totally in that.
Because as I mentioned, at some point in time, because as we need as many fans as humanly possible.
That's right. Right. We got a large arena, and we're going to try to fill it as best we can. Sure. I think we can make progress, and then, and hopefully we win some ball games, and that'll certainly help too.
Yes, absolutely. I'm actually glad you brought up the Wolstein Center, because that has been a years-long discussion mm-hmm. about what's going on with the Wolstein Center. Obviously, it is Cleveland State's home arena for at least the immediate future. Where do you see? I know that's probably going to be something that you'll be asked about multiple times over the next, I don't know how many times during the year, but where do you see kind of the strategy as far as the kind of the future of the Wolstein Center? Because obviously that's going to be a collaborative effort for not just between you, but other members of the university.
Yeah, there'll be many people involved in any decision making in that regard. We'll do some strategic exploration at some point in the longer term. It's definitely a longer term issue and not a short term issue.
Sure.
I haven't been here long enough to have a position one way or the other on what we do, or a new arena or a renovation of Wolstein or what that looks like. It's the building probably needs a little bit of attention, regardless, even some short term
Sure.
attention on things that we can do to liven it up, even if it's not the long-term solution. But I'll partner with all of my teammates on campus, and we'll do a thorough review moving forward of what the university's strategy should be in that regard.
Sure. Now, the one thing that I did want to ask about actually doesn't have anything to do with basketball or anything, but I have been kind of following the evolution of the men's lacrosse program. Over the last 3 years. Culminating with their first winning season within 3 years. And the one thing that I found very interesting, specifically in the last game, is that the last game was actually broadcast on YouTube Live through Cleveland State's YouTube channel. And obviously, given not to take away from any of the other programs, obviously, but all the other programs kind of have some association with the Horizon League, and as a result, they are kind of tied into ESPN, the ESPN family of networks. So, things like championship games that are Horizon League related, of course, are going to be ending up on ESPN3, ESPN Plus, whereas lacrosse kind of doesn't have that. And obviously, looking at kind of their dynamic, there's nowhere to go, but they're still kind of on the up. They're definitely on the up and up. And the two questions that I had with regards to lacrosse are there any opportunities there for broadcasting? And more importantly, I know this has come up a couple of times, conference affiliation for them. Is that something that's definitely something that's kind of on the horizon?
Yeah, so Coach Sheridan and I have spent a little bit of time together this first 3 weeks, and very impressive coach. His staff is great. The student athletes, the men in our program, are impressive. I've met a number of their parents who are very invested in the success of our program. For us to finish 44th in regular season RPI, and finish I think as the highest independent school in the rankings, and finish ahead of a lot of really good teams is an impressive place to be after 3 seasons. Conference affiliation is what it'll take for us to take the next step as a program. And I'll work with Coach, and certainly President Sands will be involved, and we'll explore and turn over every rock we can to find the right conference home for our men's lacrosse program. I'm committed to doing that. We've got to sell ourselves. We've got to come up with materials that talk about how great Cleveland State is. Sure. Because a lot of the folks that we're going to be reaching out to don't know a lot about us, and so we've really got to put it on thick on how we're approaching that, and really have a strategic marketing thought process about how we're trying to appeal conference commissioners to and presidents of those institutions to want to add us to their league. And so that'll be a process that we go through. And then certainly, from a broadcast standpoint, you're right, because it's independent, those rights aren't obligated to the Horizon League. There are a number of other events in our sports that get returned back to the school each year that, we could do something with otherwise, whether that's local television or, YouTube or however we would want to manage that. We'll continue to broadcast games for lacrosse when we have the capacity to do so and where it makes sense to do so. Obviously, when you bring folks in, and we've got a number of kids from in-state, but some out-of-state kids too, that their folks can't come see games, and that's always important to their friends and family, and folks are able to see them, and lacrosse players from across the country who might want to be interested in coming and playing here get a chance to see our program as well.
Sure, sure. Yeah, I know that over the course of the last 3 years, I've seen Coach Sheridan kind of and his staff really puts yeoman's work in to kind of get the word out about their program. I mean, Coach Sheridan is one of and the lacrosse team. I definitely follow the lacrosse Twitter account, so I definitely kind of well versed on that. But also too, I'm just equally impressed that with they had all their home games in the dome, and they were averaging they were practically filling that dome every game. So that's pretty impressive in and of itself. So I'm looking forward to seeing kind of how that builds up even more in the future.
Yeah, I think I went to the last game of the year and saw us clinch the winning season over Detroit Mercy, and was impressed by the crowd. To have that level of interest in just year 3 in the program is a really great sign of the trajectory, and I think that the value it brings to Cleveland State is something that certainly is something we can be proud of.
And, of course, Detroit Mercy being a Horizon League school, anytime you can beat them, that's always helpful, too.
Yeah, I asked before the game if we had a Horizon League championship trophy sitting around that we could present to the team afterwards, but they told me that wouldn't be appropriate. So,
yeah. So, it's interesting because I know that we've and I think we've actually talked about lacrosse on a previous episode with that we've had fans on, in which lacrosse has come up. I know some of the fans are also fans of lacrosse, but obviously Cleveland State and Detroit Mercy are the only 2 Horizon League schools at the moment. But you never know. Maybe everybody else will jump on board someday.
Yeah, we'll see how that space evolves, and if that sport continues to grow, there may be opportunities for us to grab other independent schools or more regional schools that maybe are in a conference that doesn't quite fit. That it's certainly a possibility. As the years go on.
Sure. All right. Well, Scott, I think that's going to kind of wrap it up for us. Again, thank you very much for coming on the podcast. And again, good luck to you. Good luck to you in the future. And I'm sure that I'm sure that you will be hearing a lot more about what's going on at Cleveland State here soon.
Yeah, I look forward to crossing paths and meeting you in person, and definitely appreciate the work you're doing to promote the league and our institutions. I think that any chance we get to really promote our student athletes that are in a really good conference is a good thing for all of us. So thank you.
Sure, not a problem. To close out the show, we wanted to thank Scott Garrett once again for coming on the show. I was really, I gotta admit, I'm kind of impressed with pretty much how things have started out for him. I have to say one other thing, and I didn't mention this during our interview, but the one thing that kind of did strike me is, kind of did intrigue me from the outset is, for the first time ever in the history of Cleveland State, we have an athletic director who is on Twitter, and he's quite engaging on Twitter as well. So you would think it's those little things to me that are kind of a big deal. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how Cleveland State, as I mentioned, really starts progressing under Garrett in the near future. So, and also wanted to thank Cleveland State student sports information director Roger McAfee for being very patient with me in getting this interview together. I know we've been kind of working on this even before, when the announcement was made, and I'm really happy that we were able to get everything together. So that will close out this particular episode, do not forget that the next episode, the second episode of this week, we are absolutely positively talking to Greg Campy. That one I'm looking forward to as much as I was looking forward to this discussion with Scott Garrett. So you definitely don't want to miss that. They're back-to-back episodes, one day after the other. So you definitely want to stay tuned to that. And remember, you can always find episodes of the Horizon Roundtable on our home at horizonroundtable.com. You can find us wherever you find podcasts, including anchor.fm, where you can actually leave a message and record, and we may actually play that in a future episode. You can also find episodes of the Horizon Roundtable on your Amazon or Google devices. There's not a lot of places we're not anymore, so keep on listening, and again, thank you for listening.